Hi, welcome back to Cambridge Inside Out. I'm Judy Nathans.
And I'm Robert Winters, and it's still election night,
You
November
still have,
2nd,
if you're watching
2021.
this live, which I don't know who is, I guess you still have another, hour and a half to go out there and vote.
That's right. Polls
You
close
have
at
to,
8
you
p.m.
have to be registered, number
You
one.
have to have been registered several weeks, 20 days, I think, before election.
Yeah.
Maybe it was less this year. I know the state law was changing regarding the deadlines for registration, and maybe they'll change further in the future. Some people are promoting election day registration. I'm personally not all that enamored of the idea,
I
largely
like
because,
it.
well, I have a
I
lot of sympathy for election workers. And if they have
Well,
to
then
kind of,
just put more money in the budget because I think that's an important. You're to have 20 days before and you're
I
not
think 20
registered for.
days is excessive.
You're
Yeah, I
yeah.
absolutely don't think it needs to be 20 days. But you know, the same day registration and voting, to me, well, I mean, I'll just leave it to say I think that there are other logistical problems potentially with
I
that.
think it's worked in other places. I think Oregon has it. I
Listen,
think
I'm not going to lose
New
sleep
Hampshire
if,
has it, I think,
right,
of
I'm not
all
going to lose
places.
sleep if it happens.
No,
You
but I
know,
haven't heard that I don't know.
you know, I think in places with a tremendous population turnover like Cambridge, it could become logistically more difficult than a much more steady as she goes community where, you know, somebody just
Well,
moved in 5 days ago and they like to vote here. And then it's pretty easy to deal with that. It's not, I don't think it's as easy
yeah,
to deal with it in a place like Cambridge, but
I
anyway, it's not a big issue, but you know,
yeah.
but anyway, it's certainly true. You had to be registered in order to vote this year. You know, and they had, you know, there were multiple ways to vote, you know, as we just mentioned in the
Sure.
previous half hour, you know, it's nobody made it difficult, you know.
Right.
There's traditional absentee voting, there's no excuse or mail-in absentee voting, drop boxes. There was early
Yeah,
voting this
it was
year.
really it's been a big change and they never
Yeah.
had it. I mean, Boston, it's the first time too that they had that for a city election. They
And
should
I think,
preface it. Yeah.
unlike last year with the federal election where voter turnout just jumped because of all
Well,
the
of course it
additional
did. It was like life
mechanisms,
or death.
but not just in Cambridge, but
No, I
it
know
doesn't,
everywhere.
it does not look, it does not appear to be the case that
Oh
voter
no.
turnout is going to leap forward
Oh no, not it. No,
this year based
no,
on the availability of these other mechanisms for voting. You know, it may go up,
no,
could go down, could be the
no.
same. You
In
know,
fact,
we'll
I
see.
think that if it's really costing a lot more to do all this and the turnout is really less, then maybe they shouldn't do
Yeah,
it again. I don't
maybe
know.
people will, you know, rethink it a
Yeah,
little bit. You know,
yeah,
you don't
yeah.
need necessarily need 5 days of early voting.
No,
I think the mail-in option may well be here to stay. It's up to the state legislature to
I like that one. I don't
finalize
know
it.
if you need early voting because I like the mail-in one because you get time to really look at it. You're not rushed. On the other hand, like you have pointed out, you can't correct it. In other words, if you go to the
Yeah,
polls, they can actually see if you've not filled
somebody,
it out
somebody,
correctly. Yeah.
somebody who's sort of an advocate for ranked choice voting nationally contacted me today
Oh,
based on
really?
a statement. I get
Wow.
that a lot, but
Well,
this was
Robert,
based.
excuse me. I know you do.
No, I know. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
the, you know, people think ranked choice
I know.
voting, Cambridge, you know,
Which is
election.
a little
So
different, but yeah.
yeah, so you know, I get a lot, but there's an issue, you know, if you because actually it happened to somebody right in front of me today when I voted was
Huh.
somebody had incorrectly filled out their ballot
Right.
and you know just you know put it through the scanner and then it kicked it out and it was like a an error code, and then the election worker had to read the error code and say, well, apparently you did one of the following things, you know, and based on the code they can say
Huh.
you either voted, you gave it the same rank for more than one candidate, in which case sometimes the voter says,
Right.
what, isn't that what I'm supposed to do? They
They
go,
do.
well,
Yeah.
yeah. So I say,
But
well, maybe you should read the instructions next time before you
I
vote.
know, but I bet a lot of the new voters just said, okay, there's 15 people. I'm going to pick this one, this one, this one, and not do it ranked.
Right. Well,
Because
I've
you don't
seen that when I look
understand.
at ballot
Yeah,
data, you'll see people will say, well, these are the ones I like a lot. One. These are the ones I like
exactly.
a little less. Two. These are the ones I really don't like nearly as much. Three.
Totally
And it counts toward
misunderstanding
none
the
of
whole thing.
them.
I know.
Ambiguous choices have to be, you overlook them. You just go
Will
right
that, will
past them.
that, will the election commission keep track of ballots that really were not and give us a count of how many really just didn't understand the process?
Uh,
Is that a known
no, they
thing?
won't do that, but
Oh,
I will, and then I
oh,
will bring it to them because that's what I've done in the past.
wait, you're allowed to see those ballots?
No, well, not the
Oh,
ballots themselves, but I can see the ballot data. All right.
okay.
So
Oh,
now,
good.
now,
I'll be
now
curious
we
about
we
that. Yeah.
successfully lobbied, several of us, to change it so that things like overvotes, we call those vertical overvotes, where you give the same
Right,
ranking to more than
right.
one
Yeah.
candidate.
Mhm.
Some people do. I've seen ones where somebody gives a number one to somebody and they go, "Oh, no, 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 I didn't mean to do that." So they cross
Yeah,
it out.
yeah,
The scanner doesn't know, that's just a mark, right?
that's
And
right.
then fills in a one for somebody else and then gives a number two to the candidate who originally began number one. Well, that ballot can't be counted for any of them because it sees ambiguity
Yep.
horizontally and vertically.
Oh,
Now, the scanner software is supposed to say, "Excuse me, voter, there's a problem here," and then the election worker knows what the machine's codes are and explains to
mhm.
the voter. And you can have up to 3 ballots. So if you screw up the first one, you still got another tub. Screw it up again, but then you can't do it.
Oh, you get three
That's it.
chances? Is that what it is? You get three
They don't,
chances?
rarely do you need to do that, but
Right, yeah.
that's what the law allows. And so that's great if you're there and you can be alerted to the fact that you made an error. But if you mail in your ballot, there's no way to do it because nobody's looking at that ballot until election day at the polls when it's being scanned. And at that point, you're not available to say, "Excuse me, Mr. Winters, you've apparently fouled up. Would you like another ballot to try again?" Can't do it. See? So, so anyway, somebody asked me about that and said, "Well, what do you do?" And I go, "Well, there's really not a lot you can do. It's the downside of mail-in
Mhm.
absentee voting is that you don't really get
Right,
to correct your errors.
right.
Now, that doesn't mean the ballot doesn't get necessarily
But
counted."
wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Unlike in-person voting, when you mail something in, they know who you are.
They know who
They
you
could,
are.
I've heard of instances where they actually contact people.
That's right. And now
I don't know
that
about Cambridge,
I
but I
don't
heard it
know.
happened in,
Right.
right?
So they could do that. Right. But the thing is that each election's a little bit different in terms of what you can do.
Okay,
It was a
yeah,
big deal where in the presidential elections last year under, the COVID rules, they
right,
actually had to ask, is it okay for us to open up the envelopes before election day? And they
right.
got the approval to take the folded ballots out of the envelopes and lay
Okay,
them flat, but they
okay.
could not yet scan them. So if there was an error, it wouldn't be known
Oh, oh,
until it got
because the
scanned.
envelope, yeah, right, because that's different, because the
Right.
envelope is where the information is not on the ballot.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, another option,
Hmm.
if the Secretary of State permits it, is
Yeah.
that you could be permitted to not only open up the envelopes and lay the ballots flat, but
Mhm.
also pass them through, scan them, but not tabulate any votes.
Mhm.
Because no, they don't want anybody seeing what the totals are because
Yeah.
somebody is going to talk to the press, go, "Hey, guess what? So and so's got so and so." So they don't want anybody to have the
Yeah.
capacity to do that. So
Yeah.
so there's different rules governing these things. But the main point here is that if you absolutely want to make sure that an error, if you do make an error, it gets caught, then vote on election day, like I did.
Okay.
But for the most part, I have to say, because I look at the ballot data, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's actually relatively little voter error in
Good.
Cambridge.
Okay.
We are relative, now again, if you have a lot of new voters, it may be different,
I'd be
you know,
really curious to see what it's going to be like this year, because I think we do
right?
have a lot of new voters.
Yeah, yeah. And if they, there are, the typical type of error you might have is somebody will believe that they can only vote for one candidate or something, which isn't true, or they'll misunderstand how you're supposed to rank, uh, so, or they'll feel that, well, I mean, there's a lot of different misconceptions people could
All
have,
right. All right.
but you
Let me
don't
ask you.
generally see too
Yeah.
many of them.
Okay. Wait a minute. Let me ask you something. If you're
Most
registered,
invalid ballots, by the way, are
yeah.
school committee ballots that are intentionally voted blank because somebody says,
Yes.
"I don't know
I
anything
don't know
about
anything
school
about the
committee."
schools. Right.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
that's actually quite common,
Okay. If
quite
you're
honestly.
registered in another town in the state, and you come here and you haven't, do you have to re-register, or do you have to just change
Uh,
your address or what?
you
Can you
change
still
your,
vote? What if you went to your neighborhood precinct and said, well, I was registered?
I believe it is right now is that if you were coming here from Somerset, Massachusetts, and you moved to Cambridge,
Yeah,
but as of the registration deadline, you were still registered in Somerset, you would have to vote in Somerset.
you couldn't do a provisional ballot.
You could, and then the election commission would have to
They
abide
had to
by
make a
state law.
Okay,
They can't just sort of make it up and go, well, she's okay, so I'll tell you, we'll let her through. You have to be uniform about it.
well, it'd be
Uh,
provisional.
well,
You'd
the
have
thing
to
is, you
check it
could,
out.
but then everybody could just say, oh, I'll just vote provisional.
Okay,
You
you're
know,
right. Yeah, all
so
right.
I think that there are some cases where it was somebody just sort of didn't get it. For example, if I lived in Ward 9, Precinct 3, and I moved
Mhm.
to Ward 4, Precinct 1,
Yeah,
and I went to vote there, and they said, you're not registered here. And then they
Yeah.
told you, you got to go back to Ward 9 to vote there.
yeah.
And they said, well, for a municipal election ballot, it wouldn't have really mattered ultimately.
Oh, you mean they could have voted there?
No, they'll still
Oh,
tell you you're supposed to go back there, but
right, okay.
but on the circumstance, let's just say somebody was of limited physical limitations,
Right,
right? And you sort of say, well, there's no way I can do that, and it's also at
Yeah.
7:30 at night, and the polls
right.
close
I
at 8,
can't get
whatever,
there. Yeah,
and
right.
they could allow somebody to vote provisionally, and then they would count it in, even though the vote was cast in Ward 4,
I
it would
see.
then be put into the Ward
I get you.
9
Okay.
Precinct 3 pile and
Yeah.
would be tabulated with those. Not that it should make a difference, but that's how
Yeah,
it would
I
be.
had that, I told you I was giving out compost bins or whatever. It was at the worst school, and this guy came up with a dog, and I was saying, oh, I hope he doesn't. And he says, can I vote here? I live over in whatever. I said, no, I think you have to go. But it was 3:30 in the afternoon or
Right, he had
8 o'clock.
time
I said,
to fix it, yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
it's just like, it's interesting. I guess I
Yeah,
don't know
so
where he
so
was
that's
coming from.
typically where how
Yeah.
provisional voting would
Yeah.
happen. By the
Yeah.
way, this calendar of events here is that in principle, we'll see about the practicalities, of
Oh, why
course,
don't you
but
show that? You described that. You're talking
uh,
about how the vote's gonna get counted?
well, I
What are you
don't really
talking
have
about?
something all queued up for doing that here, but
Oh, I
I
thought it
will.
was written.
No, what I'll just say is that
Yeah.
so tonight, after 8 o'clock,
Yeah,
as the 42 precincts come in with their little data cards and whatever,
and the
um,
big boxes, right? They come in with
and the
those
big
big,
boxes,
yeah,
but
yeah,
presumably the most of the early voting and even mail-in voting
yeah.
ballots would have been delivered to each of the 42 precincts, and they would have been
Oh,
scanned
right,
during the day,
during the day,
because
yeah, okay,
there's a lot of downtime. And so
sure,
they
oh,
just
yeah,
basically process ballots, put them through the
I see,
scanner. So in principle, most of those will have been counted tonight. There will still be auxiliary ballots, which includes blank ballots. It includes blank ballots with write-ins on them. It may include a ballot where somebody violated one of the provisions, but insisted that, no, I know exactly what I'm doing. And they go,
okay.
okay. So those will be checked out
What about
tomorrow.
when do they get them from the post office?
Well, there may be some that are legally voted and they're postmarked by the right dates and they
Which would have to be
arrived.
when? It had to be postmarked today or yesterday?
They have to actually arrive today.
They had to arrive today.
I
Oh,
believe so, yes. That's why they were
okay.
always telling people, make sure if
I
you're going to
know,
do it that way, do it early, right?
right,
Um, now, now there were some that, for example, may have been voted at, because you can still vote up until 8 p.m. at one of the drop boxes, I believe.
yes, you
And
can, I saw that,
so
yeah,
there's
you
no way
can,
they're going to
yeah,
be taking those ballots and
no,
running them up to the polls,
no,
right? If it was,
no, you're right,
if it was
yeah,
dropped in a
mhm,
box in Inman Street in mid-Cambridge,
right,
nobody's going to, but it was a voter from Ward 11. They're not going to drive up to North
right,
Cambridge with those. So those, I
no,
believe,
you're
would
right,
probably show up in the ballots to be counted tomorrow, but I'm not 100% sure of that. So, but the point is
right,
that the election isn't decided. That most
mhm,
people, at least if they finish tonight, and they might not, but
yeah,
they may have to suspend it and then pick it up tomorrow morning. But um, usually you have a pretty good idea of the outcomes at the end of tonight. Um, but it could change if it's very close with the additional auxiliary ballots. It could
mhm,
change tomorrow by end of day.
mhm,
And even then, tonight is called preliminary.
Okay.
Tomorrow would be called the unofficial final count. But then the official count doesn't happen until
It's for a
10
while.
days after
Right, I was
election
gonna say,
day.
it's 10 days.
They have to allow for overseas absentee ballots,
Overseas.
which
Mhm.
we don't usually get very many of those in a
Right,
municipal election.
yeah,
Really just a handful, but you have to
yeah,
count them.
yeah,
And they will adjudicate some of those provisional ballots on
right,
that same day, that Friday after this Friday. And then they'll run the computer tally one more time, and then that will be the final official count.
right.
Now, is that the end of the story? Yes. But if it's something that's really close, candidates could there's a certain window of time where they could demand a recount. Then they have to gather some signatures to demand a recount. The Election Commission does not have to actually grant a recount, right? But as
Right.
long as the margins are relatively thin, they generally will.
What if it's there have been those, right? I mean, there's been
We
like a
had recounts in
6 vote difference or,
2001. We had one,
yeah,
yeah, the closest one was a school committee race in
yeah.
2001. But
Uh-huh.
we've had recounts, I think, in 2009, 2013 city council.
But you can lose by what, 14 votes? I mean, didn't Craig lose by like? I
I forget exactly. You can have very close margins, and there have been some elections that were pretty close.
Mhm.
For the most part, when they do a recount, it tends to only reinforce the original, give or take a
True.
ballot or two.
Yeah,
The wild card is that if there are candidates who have a surplus of ballots,
right.
because of the Cincinnati method that we use for surplus
Mhm.
distribution, there's a chance that a different collection of surplus ballots could be the ones that are transferred,
That's true.
and they
Yeah,
may transfer in somewhat different ways. So you could see a
yeah,
swing of a dozen votes or something in that case. But it would only make a difference in an extraordinarily close election anyway. So anyway, the long story short is that we'll probably have a pretty good idea by tonight if they finish tonight. And then we'll have an even clearer notion by tomorrow. And the likelihood that anything changes at the 10-day, overseas absentee ballot, a final official count, that's
Mhm.
extremely unlikely that would change more than a ballot or two,
Yeah.
really. So, so anyway, that's
So
to come. That's where we
now
stand.
you wanted to talk about school committee versus school
Yeah,
committee?
basically what I wanted to say
Yeah,
something here. There's not a lot to say. I mean, we
mm,
could look through all the candidates, but honestly, it's all sort of said and done now.
yeah,
And the voters have, kind of doing what they're going to do. But I do want to mention a couple of things. I think maybe what I'd like to do is just first mention kind of quickly, just so people understand the scale of money that has come in. Never mind all the particulars here, but so for example, Paul Toner has topped the mark in terms of the
again? Oh,
total
wow. Yeah.
the total amount of money taken in. And followed by Quentin Zondervan, Mark
Oh,
McGovern. It's kind of interesting
wow.
because,
Quentin made more than Mark.
well,
That's
one of the
encouraging.
things I started adding was a new column for how much money they personally threw into the
Oh,
campaign to
well, that's
beef it
different.
up.
Yeah.
I only
Oh,
added that a
sure.
couple of days ago. So,
No,
for
that's
example,
important. That's important. Yeah. Quentin.
Zondervan may
Yeah.
have brought in 64,000 of that, but
But he
15,000 of it
15.
came
Yeah,
from him.
sure.
Perhaps more
Right.
startling
Yeah.
is Burhan Azim at 35,000, but
Oh,
13,000 of that came from his own
mm,
pockets.
he's doing
So
well. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
All right.
those justice candidates, right? Yeah,
Well,
um,
I mean, he's whatever.
right. But there was certainly some controversy about like where's the source of their money. So, for example, if you were to
Mhm.
focus on who's bringing in the most money from,
Oh,
basically the great influencers, people with real
yeah, but
estate.
real estate. So it's $10,000, and people are just quibbling about this stuff. I'm sorry. I just feel
Well,
like
I
it's
think it's the
nothing.
scale of it's the issue. For example,
Oh,
if you're a
okay.
candidate like McGovern who pulled in
Yeah.
over $20,000 from those interests, and that actually is larger than the entire campaign budgets of other candidates, I think
True.
that actually becomes a bit of an issue. Now,
Yeah,
one
but
thing
he's a stronger candidate than some of those other ones. So he's more been around.
But there are other very
I don't
strong
know.
candidates who took in no money from those sources too. It's a choice they make, and people
Well,
sort
it's
of,
because they have principles and they're living by their
well,
principles, which is fine.
well,
And
well,
Mark is not trying to hide anything
it's
about that. I mean,
it's also part of the campaign rhetoric too.
yeah,
For
I
better or
know.
worse, it's
God
sort of like
forbid
you're
you take
saying
anything. Meanwhile,
from
your real
right,
rich
right.
friends probably have lots of
Right.
interests in stuff. Forget it.
Personally, I don't really take great issue with somebody
No.
taking money from some property owners.
No.
I do have some concerns about the scale of it. That I will acknowledge.
I just don't
and
see it out of control like that. I don't. I guess I'm looking at what's going
it's
on
been worse
nationally,
than
globally, and I see $10,000. Say, okay,
it has been far worse in years past. I will simply
okay,
say that.
all right,
By the way, the one little piece of information that I only just got today
yeah,
was, I was mainly focusing on city council because you don't even see because you basically only get 8
yeah.
days before the election. Do you ever see the reports from school committee candidates? And I was
Why
actually
is that? Why don't you
it's just
see it before?
because it's not a depository account required. You don't have to, the banks don't have to
Oh,
report it. So
I
you
didn't
just have
know
to
that.
do it
Oh,
at the end of a year and 8 days before the election.
oh, all right.
And
So
I
do you
was
have those
quite,
figures?
I don't have it, I just have it in front of
Oh,
me on a piece of paper. But I was
okay,
quite stunned. I mean, a very high number for a school committee campaign
yeah,
raise and spend would be 20,000 or so.
yes,
That's sort of
that's
at the
high,
high end,
right? Yeah,
unlike, which is a lot less than city council campaigns.
sure,
But one
yeah.
new school committee candidate, Akriti Bambry, pulled in almost $66,000, which
That's
dwarfs
crazy.
most of the city council
That's
campaigns.
crazy. That's like combined budget of probably all
Yeah,
the rest of them.
has already spent uh, over $32,000, which dwarfs every other school committee budget I've
I
ever
know.
seen.
That's like,
And this doesn't this doesn't even include the late mailings and things that will only show up at the end of year
oh, I've gotten
report.
at least 2 mailings from her.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, my Lord, now and again, I'm not passing judgment here, but I have to just say, as a
Well,
person who follows campaign
I
finance
know.
stuff, I was pretty
Well,
stunned by that.
when I walked over, to do my thing at the Morse for the recycling or compost, there were 2 people there holding her signs. I believe they were her signs. Yeah. Or at least one. And then they left. But so she's everywhere, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, I'm just going to do one other quick share screen here. One of the things that I got around to doing just a couple of days ago was, I do maintain this sort of index of all candidates who've ever run, and I'm not going to run into it here, but you'll notice that I added all the candidates for this year's election in here now. They don't have a number of number 1 votes yet because we don't know what those will be, but I will update these once the election results are known. So now you're at least officially on the list if you were a candidate on the ballot.
So what is the figure on the far right? That's the
number one
votes,
the number 1 votes that the candidate would have gotten here. So this has been on my website for years, and it has a few other, who was elected, people who then left for whatever reason, either death or conviction or whatever, So anyway, I only wanted to make the point that I'm, kind of getting myself ready to get all the results. One other thing that we do at the end of every election is I also will put together I don't know, how would you call it? It was basically the blow by blow, round by round description of each of the elections. So it's one thing most people just want to know who the winners are. And I'll put those up, and I'm sure a lot of other people will put that information out. There's always sort of a pointless race to see who gets it out there. I don't think that's a value. The one thing I try to do is to give the complete list of how many votes, what were their surplus, how did the surpluses transfer.
I like that. Yeah, the transfer stuff. Very interesting.
Those of us who've sort of watched this for the years are much more interested in the detailed report like that.
Strongest, right? Who got?
Which were the really close margins in terms of people deciding whether to seek recounts, which I hope doesn't happen, but there could be close races here.
Could be.
Maybe I'll just say one other last thing. This is a very, very strange year in terms of the politics of it all, because you have a situation where there's sort of the ABC grouping of candidates, or
Mhm.
which are primarily about densification of housing. But then they were not beloved apparently by the Residents
No,
Alliance,
the
which
Cambridge
are,
Resident Alliance has some different, yeah,
and there almost no intersection between them. And
right.
they're,
Couple,
but they're
a couple of the
very,
candidates
but they're
were, yeah.
almost the same as the Our Revolution group. So they seem to
Cambridge
be
Residents Alliance was? It's the
6 of
same as,
7. Yeah. So they have 7, the Revolution has 6.
oh,
The only difference is Patty Nolan, who the Revolutionaries refused to endorse because
her Palestinian stuff, yeah.
she didn't support the boycott resolution
I
about
know,
HP,
I
so she
know.
stood her ground on that one.
The more endorsements people got, the less I cared to vote for them.
There
I'm
were some
telling
of
you
these
what.
organizations were saying, just look at our people, that's it. And I'm sitting there doing battle with
Mhm.
all of these
Yeah,
slates saying,
I know.
screw the slates, look at the
Yeah,
candidates, do your
I
homework.
know. I
You're a
know.
voter, your responsibility
I
as a
know,
voter.
but that's how they get the twos and the threes,
I
and
know
it's
it,
to
I
their
know it, but
credit, you know.
I
I
feel
don't know.
like I'm doing battle with these slates who are basically trying to, just,
Yeah.
vote based on some sort of
Well,
nonsensical ideological purity.
for some of these new voters that don't follow all the stuff like you do, or even like I do,
I
they're
certainly
gonna
will
just
acknowledge.
go, they're gonna hold it in
I
their hand and
acknowledge
go
that.
into the,
Yeah, I
yeah,
acknowledge that right away. Is that
yeah,
it's difficult to be a voter sometimes, especially if you're
yeah.
relatively new. You seek advice. I
Right, because
still
you
think
want to do
people,
your civic duty, but you still
a
don't know
lot
who
of
to
people
vote
seek
for.
advice from friends,
Yeah. Oh,
and I
yeah.
think that's probably some of the best advice you can get. But other ones will
Right.
go
Depends
to
on who your
slates.
friends are.
Yeah, exactly. But people are trying to characterize, well, this
I
slate,
know.
they're the bad guys. No, these are the good
No.
guys, whatever.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's all crap.
You gotta, and
Yeah.
oh, all
you
right.
know,
All
but
right.
we'll see. You'll see, just how many of these groupings exist and persist beyond the election. Honestly, we could
I
use
know.
a real civic association in this city, and we don't have one.
I know. All right. Well, we have just less than a half a minute. So let's wish the best for everybody. Let's wish the best for our city.
That's right. And peace.
And lots of stuff going on in the country, elections, Virginia, all that. So I'm going to be tuned
May
in.
peace and love reign in the People's Republic.
Yes. Yeah, right. We still have 10 seconds. So
Right.
peace, reign, and health. We got to have health. Get
And good beer.
vaccinated. Yeah,
And good beer.
Okay. All right. That's it. Bye-bye.